right junior high class, I want to finish up the notes on Habakkuk. So go ahead and open your Bibles to the book of Habakkuk, and then you can turn in your Route 66 notes to lesson number 40. We filled out most of this last week, or whenever I put out that last video, but there's just a couple of notes at the end that I want to go over, and you all in the class would know that this is more of the personal application section, what to think about it and some of the explanation a little bit. So we've gone over most of the notes now, so this will be a little bit shorter than the last lesson, but I still want to go over it with you. So make sure you're at lesson 40 in Route 66, and make sure that you are in the book of Habakkuk. Remember that Habakkuk is a prophet in the Old Testament. But picking up where we left off, we had looked at some of the different aspects of Habakkuk. We looked at his talk with God when he was asking why God hadn't punished Judah yet, or how God could use wicked Babylon to punish Judah. We talked a little bit about how God is sovereign, and so he can use even bad people to accomplish his will, which is something that's truly great about him. But we're going to continue in Habakkuk. We looked through his questions, but the lesson that we can learn from Habakkuk. And this is just to kind of sum up what we looked at, okay? We know that God is in control. We talked about how because God is sovereign, no matter what happens in life, we know that he's in control, and we don't need to worry. I mean, you even think about things that are happening right now with this virus. There's a lot of people who are really scared or even freaking out because they don't know what's going to happen. But as bad as it might be, we can remember and we can have comfort by knowing that God is still in control. And so we have no reason to worry. We know that God has a plan and that he works for the benefit of his people. Romans 8:28 actually kind of supports this. So you can turn there if you want. I'm going to read it for you. In Romans chapter 8, verse 28 says, "And we know that all things work together for good to them that love God, and to whom are called according to his purpose." You see, that's a wonderful promise in the Bible, that if you're loving God and you're following God like you should, that the things that happen, even if they seem bad, they're ultimately going to work for good. And so we don't know why God allows bad things to happen all the time, but one of the things that we do know is that he can still work his will through even bad things. Because, and the next thing is, God is faithful to his people. How many of you can think of a time in your life where for you or for your family, God showed himself faithful? That's kind of a big question, so I'm going to give you a second just to think about it. But a time in you or your family's life where God showed himself faithful. I'll give you just a second to think about it. Maybe you can write it out in the side of your notes. That way you have it to remember. I know a time for me, and even for my wife, when we were at college in Oklahoma, we had to pay the school bill. And there was a lot of times where, even though we were working jobs, the school bill was expensive, and it didn't seem like we were going to have enough to pay. But then God either gave us extra hours at work, or he even used someone else to help provide what we needed. And so I can think of a time where God was faithful in that way, because we were trying to serve him, we were trying to do what we needed to do, but we couldn't do it in our own power, we couldn't do it with our own money. And so God had to show himself faithful and help us in that way. So a wonderful example of God being faithful to us. And I know there's been many other times as well where he's been able to show himself faithful, because maybe it's not just finances, maybe it's safety. This is kind of a different story, but this last year, I was working in a warehouse, and my car had some troubles, but it was doing okay. And so I was driving back and forth to the warehouse, and I was spending probably 20 minutes on the highway, and a lot of traffic both directions. So I was on the highway a lot every day because of the job. And so randomly one day, they let me leave early, and so I went home. No big deal. And then the next day I was running errands, and while I was running errands, my tire flew off while I was driving. It was actually kind of scary because it started making this weird noise, and then Mrs. Schmutzler and I were just in the car, and all of a sudden the tire flew off, and it was really scary. But it happened literally right outside my neighborhood, And I was thinking about it, and if I hadn't gone home from work early, then it would have happened while I was on the highway surrounded by traffic. Then it could have been a really bad accident, and it could have been a lot worse. And so, some people are like, oh, that's just coincidence. But for me, I think that God really had his hand on me, and he was keeping me safe, because it's way better to have your tire fly off right outside of your neighborhood than to have it fly off at the highway with everyone around you. It's best to not have it fly off at all, though. But those are just a couple of times in my own life where I can remember God being faithful. And I hope that you can come up with some examples of that yourself. But we need to understand that God is faithful. And so I have the definition of faithful here. It says, keeping promises, trustworthy, following through on commitments. Okay? I don't know in your notes if you actually have to write that down. If it's already written down, I want you to get like a highlighter or a colored pencil or a pen or something, and I want you to just make a big note, because I want you to keep that definition, okay? Faithful, keeping promises, trustworthy, following through on commitments. Now I'm going to ask you a question, and I want you to honestly answer it, okay? Are you a faithful person? I mean, think about it. We're called to be like Christ, and if he was faithful, then we should be faithful. Are you a faithful person? Do you keep your promises? When you promise your mom that you're going to get your chores done, or you promise your little brother that you'll let him play video games with you, do you keep those promises? Are you trustworthy? Do you tell a lot of lies? Do you have a reputation of being a liar, for tricking people all the time? Or when you say something, do people know, oh yeah, she's telling the truth, or oh yeah, he doesn't lie to me? And do you follow through on commitments? When you make the decision to do something, even if you don't tell anyone you're going to do it, if you make that decision, do you follow through and get it done? Are you reliable in that way? Are you trustworthy, and do you follow through on those commitments? Faithfulness is a really important part of a Christian's life, because it's where our testimony comes from. People will know if you're a trustworthy person or not just by watching you and talking to you. And so you have a responsibility to have a reputation where you're faithful. Okay? So to help you grow in your confidence in God, even through the bad times, I want you to keep going over Habakkuk 3:17-19, okay? I believe 18 would have been your verse this week. But it's important to go over that, okay? So for the last question on the think about it, all right? I believe that's page 195 for you. What circumstances tempt you to doubt God's faithfulness, and how can you overcome that temptation? So what things might happen that make you wonder if God is really there for you? What are some things that might cause you to wonder, is God really there? Is he really faithful? Is he really good? I want you to write some of those things down. Maybe some examples, if someone that gets sick, like really sick, and they might even die. Sometimes we could wonder, okay, God, why are you doing this? Are you really that good that you're going to let them die from being sick? Or, with this virus right now, maybe some of your parents have lost their jobs. Or maybe they're just not working as much and finances are a little bit tighter than normal. That's how it is for a lot of people in the country right now. And you can look at that and be like, okay, God, why aren't you providing anymore? And so there are those temptations to kind of doubt whether or not God is really faithful. And so I want you to, whatever you wrote down, I want you to answer this question too. How can you overcome that temptation? How can you keep yourself from doubting that God is faithful? I'll give you just a second to think about it, and I'll give you the answer. All right, hopefully some of you have written down some answers. The biggest way for me, okay, and it may be a different answer for you, but for me, is to remember times where God has been faithful in the past, okay? Because when I remember God being faithful in the past, it makes it easier for me to trust he'll be faithful in the future. If Zephanie and I are, looking for a job or, finances or something, I remember those times in college where God provided for us. When someone I know gets sick, I remember times where he's helped people feel better in the past. When I remember how God has been good in the past, I can believe that he's going to be good in the future, okay? So for me, that's how I fight that temptation. Whenever I start to doubt, I just remember all the ways that he's been good in the past, Okay? So I hope that you have all your notes filled out. If you haven't watched the last video yet, go back on the YouTube account and watch it. It's lesson 40, Habakkuk, and you can get all your notes filled out. Habakkuk's a really cool book in the Bible. I'm glad we were able to go over it. Again, if you have any questions, let me know. You can text me or email me or call me or FaceTime me or really anything. Just get a hold of me and I will help you out. And I'm looking forward to moving on. Next week, we're going to talk about the book of Zephaniah. Okay? So I will talk to you all then.